Nature Breakthroughs with Dr. Wild Ben Goldman. Conversations with changemakers in a world gone mad. To discover what you need for personal, organizational, and societal change, get your free download of 3 ancient rituals smart entrepreneurs use to bounce back from shifts in the market and inside themselves. Go to www.naturebreakthroughs.com.
Yes, you pull them till they bite down. On the lies that you built from my doubt. I don't want money, I don't want cars, I just want to be free.
Welcome, Anna Ehrsam, to the Nature Breakthroughs podcast. Conversations with changemakers in a world gone mad. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Ben. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure.
And you're someone that's kind of hard to pin down. I kind of, when I think of your work, I think of there's kind of like 3 hats that you seem to be juggling. One is as a visual artist with, I guess, decades of practice in various experimental media. And then you're also like a publisher and an editor-in-chief of the Battery Journal. That may be what you're best known for nowadays. And I also know that you're an entrepreneur, both the private sector and also in terms of thinking about doing nonprofit entrepreneurship too. Is that, am I covering all the bases?
Yeah.
And a mom too.
Yes. I wear, as you say, many hats. I have a master's degree in fine art from Yale University, where I studied art history and had a robust studio practice. Also studied philosophy and literature. And I've also always been into health and wellness as an athlete. So art, culture, health, and wellness have all kind of come together in this really beautiful way in my present life as I work on an ecology app called Humanimal, which is in the beta stage right now. I have a publishing entity, I like to call it a mini empire that is burgeoning and growing all the time. And it is in the process of becoming a nonprofit, and there will be also a component that is for-profit as I build alliances with people in the art world who are responsible for documenting and providing image services for every major museum, every major blue chip gallery, and sort of mid-tier galleries, as well as every major artist in the world. So I'm really actively trying to grow as an intellectual in terms of my art historical scholarship, in terms of my own personal practice as an artist, which is actually quite rigorous, and in terms of what I can offer as educational and cultural content to the public. So yes, and I'm a mother as well, which is certainly the most important job of all. And I think that very much influences everything I do with a lens toward the future and helping to try and change what I feel is this kind of perilous course that humanity is currently on in terms of ecology, wellness, and really trying to enact and bring about and help other people to enact and bring about positive change in the world, in themselves, in their own lives, and in the environment. That's my dog barking. She wants out. She'll keep barking. Yeah.
So tell me how what's the biggest way that you're trying to affect change? Like, of all these things, where would you start by thinking about what you're doing strategically?
Well, education, I think, is all powerful, right? And so I've worked as an educator for 20 years.
As a publisher, you mean, or educator? Like
So I teach art history and also studio classes. So I believe through art, people can develop the skills that they need to be critical, sort of acrobatic thinkers in the world at large to help with problem solving in their own lives, and also looking around them and the world and maybe questioning normative models, the sort of status quo, and pushing boundaries, and helping people to become perhaps more aware or enlightened, expand people's consciousness through education.
What's his or her name?
My dog is Bruna, the wonder dog. She's
Bruna. Oh, you have to walk her, or can you just let her out?
Oh, I could let her out.
You want to take 2 seconds, let her out?
I'll let her out. I'm terribly sorry. I knew this would happen.
Okay, I can, with the script, I can edit it.
Okay. Well, she'll need to come back in a moment too.
That's okay. Just.
I was so happy to have a quiet house, so I'm in the main space rather than shut in my little concrete bunker. But I knew she would do that anyway. So I'll have to get up in a moment and let her back in. But yes, so.
So the battery journal's like an outgrowth of that educational direction, and
Yes.
what's the purpose of the battery journal? Why is it called the battery journal?
So a battery holds a charge, right? So the charge is in the cultural content that is stored in the battery. So it's meant to ignite a thought and an action in people. So it's educational tool, battery, to turn people on and get them engaged in thinking about pertinent cultural phenomena, things that are going on in the world in terms of art and culture. It's meant to, trigger ideas and help people on their intellectual path. It's also meant to serve a community of artists that very much need support and exposure in terms of their practice, what they're doing. Many emerging artists appear on the journal in the form of documentaries that I make, studio visits. I will have live feed and events through the journal as well, where artists will be involved in their studio practice, and we will show that live. And so it's an extension of my art historical scholarship. And also, I'm a hippie kid, really, at heart still. And so I have a very strong sense of communalism and community, and also grassroots idea of how to bring about change. And so this is really an extension of everything that I am and that I am becoming, and an effort to help people to become and to continue on their path of enlightenment and awareness and intellectual growth.
Well, I could ask you to tell me about like some of the more interesting things that have been in the journal, but let me be a little more confrontational maybe, which is, as also someone that has had the hat of artist and other hats, I often question whether art actually has any impact or change in terms of change in the world. You're talking about it as though it does. What's your evidence, or just how do you think art makes any difference anywhere?
Well, I believe very strongly that art is the heart, soul, and intellect of any culture. And so we're talking about the literary arts, we're talking about music, we're talking about visual arts. And that is what makes a culture what it is. And so that, to me, has a profound relevance in terms of the way I live my life as a practicing artist in an artful way. I like the idea that art and life can really come together. I'm also an inventor. And so I hold several patents in technologies that I made because they didn't exist. And I felt there was a need to invent these technologies and patent them, which the patenting is another scenario entirely. And we could get into that. But I think that art and science and technology are really one thing. Different aspects of a field of inquiry and exploration, experimentation, and development that is incredibly powerful, because new technologies, new art, if you will, and the way it's implemented creatively and has the potential to solve problems is all important.
I hear Bruno wants to come in. Why you're gonna go? Huh? Yeah. While you're out there, think of like an example of
Okay.
think of an example of some cultural contribution that you think has had a big impact on society.
Okay. Yes.
So so if you could like just point to when I hear what you're saying about the various art forms, create our culture. But I don't know, it feels to me like a lot of our culture, when you talk about, like, let's say American culture, it's often, it's very traditional. There's like a mainstream that is so deeply rooted and kind of like ancient, I mean, almost biblical and puritanical, and these kind of like deeply held myths. Can you give me an example of like a cultural contribution, let's say in the last 10 years, that has changed things, maybe for the better or for the worse? I mean, how
Sure. I mean, I could think of many. In terms of something very, very fundamental that affects all human beings, the globe, I think we could talk about gender politics, and that is certainly something that is central to the field of literature, cultural theory, but also performance art and the way people perform. So a gender performativity. And I think of one example offhand because she's become such an incredible rock star. One of my colleagues from Yale University was Reginald Cox. Now they use the pronoun of she. She is transgendered, and Lavernia Cox, and is now the spokesperson for transgender rights. And I met her, at Yale University studying sculpture. And at that time, she was very much into performance. And this performance, enacting these new modes, these new ways of gender performativity, became a life path. And she has inspired countless multitudes, millions of people, and is an incredible voice for people that have been suppressed and repressed by a Judeo-Christian, puritanical, repressive, very conservative, normative culture that does not make space, or has not traditionally or historically made space for sort of new modes of gender performativity or new ways of being and new narratives. So that's one way that an artist, a performance artist, has helped to empower and give voice to millions.
She's famous as an actress from Orange is the New Black.
Correct. Yes.
Like that.
Yes, and a brilliant woman. So
Yale went to, I'm looking up her, it doesn't show Yale on her education.
She dropped out.
It
was too conservative for her. Yes. Yeah.
And we have the recent news of the first trans woman Emmy nominee happened, I think, yesterday. The lead in the I think it's Netflix. Anyway, the lead in the series that happened yesterday for the first time.
That's fantastic news.
So that's a good example. I mean, it's also an example of what do they call it, the culture wars. Let's say so. It's well, it's a change of culture, you know. So
Absolutely.
attitudes. Huh?
Yeah, shifting culture, shifting ideas, shifting behavior. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
I think that's the way change happens, actually. I think it is through the arts, through ideas, through expanding consciousness and awareness, through the arts, whether it be embodied in performance and disseminated, or images, or, you know, look at Robert Mapplethorpe, too. I mean, Mapplethorpe is an interesting case where, you know, he introduced a whole kind of iconology that had never been contextualized within art, and it's you know, it was a scandal, but it pushed people to recognize the primacy of other ways of being and doing and acting, and so I think that is incredibly profound and powerful and significant.
I mean, when I think of Mapplethorpe, I'm just more sure I'm not confusing people. Was he the
photographer.
Was he the Piss Christ guy?
No, that's Andre Serrano.
Oh, that's Serrano. Anyway,
that's Serrano too, pushing boundaries, you know.
But both these guys are lightning rods.
Yes.
I'd say more than like Laverne Cox.
Yes.
And I think they, you know, it's also contributed, I think, to the polarization and kind of boogeyman like nature of our politics.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, you know, artists play an interesting role of both antagonizers and catalysts, and but they can also be the healers and the people that bring people together.
Absolutely. I mean, I think too there is real value in that, as you say, you know, agit propaganda, political art. You know, think about even we can think about the propaganda involved in Black Lives Matters or the Me Too movement or any movement that relies upon an identity, right? That identity is crafted in the media. You know, that's the kind of art, a media art.
That mural of George Floyd, I must have seen it a million times. I've never heard who the artist was, though. Do you?
Yes.
Do you know?
Don't know. No, I don't.
Like an anonymous artist, but it's probably the most famous image related to the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And the artist, as far as I know, is mostly anonymous. I wonder if he's benefited at all from that. You know, the art world is a weird place. How I just read today that Biden's son is like going to have a show. I don't know if you saw that, where he's become an artist, or he's apparently always made art, and now he's going to exhibit it, and he's got like promoters, and he's going to be selling his work for, you know, like $500,000 and things like that. And they're claiming that that anyone that buys it is going to be kept in like some kind of secrecy, so his father won't so they won't have influence. In fact, I think there's been a White House policy on just geared to Hunter Biden's selling of Hunter Biden's artwork at this point.
Well, that's amazing. Well, so that the power of art, yet again, shaping politics and behavior. And I think it's great to have somebody who is so high profile asserting that, you know, I am an artist. I think making art in and of itself is a radical act.
Yeah.
Because in this culture, it's not sanctioned in many ways. You know, artists are the hardest working people I know, really. You know, doctors too, yes, of course. But artists have to do everything and then their work, you know, to survive. So many artists that I know who have great educations, Ivy League educations, and their teachers, they are kind of stretched to the limit when it comes to finances, because art, unless you're selling actively in a blue chip gallery, you're just struggling to make your work. And so, you have a whole demographic of people who, claim the moniker of artist, who are just fighting to survive and fighting to sort of claim the right and the time and the space and have the energy and the materials to present an idea embodied in whatever medium they choose to embody it in: video arts or a performance or a poem, a novel, a painting, sculpture, whatever the medium. It is a struggle in this culture to survive as an artist, and to say, no, I'm not going to stand in line and be, rank and file, status quo, and do my 9 to 5 and just be a wage slave. I am actually looking for some freedom in terms of my life, my intellectual life, growth and development, and the way I spend my time. And actually, I'm interested in presenting some new ideas. And so I think the very act of making art is a radical act.
Well, I mean, I hear you, but I also to me, maybe I'm too cynical, but the Hunter Biden episode is more a demonstration of how art is part of this kind of winner take all economics. And in many ways, the art world is the most extreme example of that. They say many are called, but few are chosen, something like that. And it's so related to celebrity, and that the other thing is that there's the aspect of it that's related to celebrity, which is what Hunter Biden is profiting, or potentially going to profit off of. And I don't know that inspires any other artist,
right?
Because they're not the son of the president. But the other kind of key part of this in this world is the kind of viral nature of cultural production, how it's amplified in social media. And so, there's a democratizing aspect to that, but it's still a winner take all thing where there's, it's like a lottery where one in millions, it becomes revenue profitable, and everyone else is depreciable. Everyone else is worth nothing. So it's like,
there is that aspect.
Yeah.
I would argue there are several strata or stratum to the art world. So we're talking the blue chip art gallery and the whole art world apparatus that exists to support luxury goods. And so, yes, that exists. But also, I exist and you exist as an artist. And we are going to make our work regardless. And so we make our living in the way that we can. I am an art historian, an art professional, and as you had said earlier, I wear many hats. And I struggle sometimes to find the time to make my work. And hey, it would be great if Paula Cooper was my gallerist and she sold everything I made. My work certainly has the merit. It's better, I would say, I'm going to brag, I'm bragging, than probably 99.9% the fluff that's out there that is a luxury good. And I make it as I can, in the way that I can and when I can. And what I bring to my work that many don't is a whole lot of intellectual weight and 30 years of experience. And so that goes into the simplest of my inventions, my works of art, embodied in a myriad of ways. I mean, I've now entered this realm of what I'll call social sculpture or social practice, where producing and directing documentaries about artists and art and culture has become part of my artistic practice. So, I've kind of opened up, but I also have this more discreet private practice in my studio that's fundamentally important to me, because it's about my mind minding itself and about being with my work and about being with my ideas. And sure, I would love to have Paula Cooper, Barbara Gladstone, you know, Gaussian Gallery knocking on my door. Perhaps they would. And I would embrace that. But I also have this incredible community of artists, friends, and colleagues who are art professionals who own small, artist owned and operated galleries. In fact, my partner and I have a gallery called Park Place Gallery, which is owned and operated by artists. And it's really a gallery for artists and for art. It is not for collectors and bankers and luxury goods. It's really about ideas and pushing the boundaries of ideas in various different ways, in different mediums. And we have a great following. That's Park Place Gallery in Brooklyn, New York. And that was started because of this very issue you raised, which is, the kind of aspect of, the art world being elitist and exclusionary, and, you're one in a million if you make it into this kind of blue chip situation. But there are other ways, there are other strata and ways for artists to make and make their work and show their work and share their ideas. And, a large part of why artists make their work is to share their ideas with people and to have a dialogue. Much like I think we're having a dialogue because of this, because, as intellectuals, as makers, this is an important part of the engagement. Through this kind of discourse and dialogue, we, grow our ideas and expand our own awareness and our own sort of knowledge base. This is vitally important to have dialogues. So thank you for.
Can you just tell me like an example of like one of the things that you're proudest of in your world of creativity, which could be, an article you've published or one of the social sculptures you've done, or the piece of art, or just in all the things you've done. What's one of the things you're most proud of?
Well, so one of the things that I'm very proud of is a patent, which is for a multiaxial joint. And it's actually 10 joints in one. And I had to overcome thousands of medical patents that pre-existed before this. Here I am, an artist, just trying to understand how to make a simple joint. It's a magnetic joint.
Just can you start more like simply, which is what is a joint? I'm assuming you don't mean like a one made out of weed. You're talking about something.
It's like a ball and socket joint, like something that would exist in your shoulder.
So it's for medical. It's like a medical device.
Well, I made it for figures. Figures as a sculptor, because for instance, this dovetails beautifully with another very, I think, profound accomplishment, which is that I put myself through art school by working as a sculptor. And I have made figures, historical figures, for the Smithsonian Institute, for example. And so I've made highly, highly realistic natural figures for many major museums for many years. And so I just finished so for instance,
like a wax museum thing?
No. So the National Museum of African American History and Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., I produced with a small group of artists I believe there are 72 figures. There are many figures, and Serena Williams and Jackie Robinson. So all of these cultural heroes, these figures who, finally there's this really amazing museum, which is the National Museum of African American Culture and History Center in DC, right on the mall, which boasts the longest visitation time of any audience, any museum ever. People come there and they stay there and they want to be there with this history. And there was, of course, a real need for it. So these figures, however, often they're static. And so I really wanted to figure out how to make these figures move and even be animated. So this patent is, something I've had for years now, but I wanted to make a mechanical apparatus, a joint, if you will, a ball and socket, a multiaxial magnetic joint, 10 joints in one, that I could use in a figure. And the figure doesn't have to be a human figure or human-like or sculpture of the human body. It could be any form, but just to allow it to be posable and movable and have the fullest range of motion. So this is art and invention and technology at work, and also art and technology at work in the museum. The Smithsonian Institutes with the history of transportation. I've done so many of these museums. It's on my CV, but I play that down. But I've really been working sculptor, artisan, and an art historian for years. And so
This is probably one of the only podcasts between two patent holders that anyone will ever hear. It's I'm sure for you too, it's a very strange process going through the whole process of publishing a patent.
Yeah.
Is your invention being used in those sculptures that you've created?
Not in figures. No, it's not in those figures. No.
Is it being used? Have you been able to?
I use it, but I've not licensed it or sold it. But that's a thing that I, with these many hats I wear, one of the things that I do is, one of my other patents is something I call the smart skin, which would radically transform the face of green energy technology. And, so this would be a full-time job for me to market this stuff or license it. And I have gotten some traction on it, but can do so much and can pursue what I can pursue. And frankly, as a mother, I'll just briefly touch upon this. I had a child, and this culture is a very strange place for everyone, but I'll just speak from a woman who had a child, but had some health issues and this is personal information, but I feel like I should share it because perhaps it can help other people. I spent over 5 years having infertility treatments, and it really derailed me and took a huge amount of time. And, I'm so sort of goal and mission oriented. It's not that I was dying to have a child, but rather I was going to complete this goal, this task. And finally I was successful. I had a premature child, and so then my mission was to grow her. So now I have this gifted and talented, beautiful little girl who's 8, So I've gone through this really kind of strange trajectory in terms of my career path and my way of working and moving and doing in the world, and which I don't think it hasn't been limited, but it has been greatly influenced by my birth story, and so. And it's curious because I had no community, I had no support, And this goes to thinking about gender performativity and normative models. And I remember in my graduate, it was a seminar class, art and theory class, cultural theory, about, we were talking about, and this was with this, huge art historical figure, a woman, talking about taboos. And I said, well, what about the taboo of having children and like having a family? And, there were mostly women in this class, actually. And they said, well, no, we won't talk about that in this class because we're intellectual women and we're going to stick to, the text and talking about the text. And we're talking about stigmas and we're not talking about having children. And so I was totally suppressed in that moment, which was perfect. It couldn't have been more perfect. So, here I was out of, just trying to understand how a child would fit into my life and how I would continue my creative practice as an artist, as an inventor, as a cultural producer. And here I am coming out of it, many years later, and realizing, wow, as a culture, we really need to do a lot of work to provide support systems, whether it be through, just talking more about this, but also, just support somehow, awareness.
I mean, I do think one key role, and maybe the major role of artists is in breaking boundaries and giving voice to things that have been previously ignored or repressed. And that was a great example of like implicit bias, let's say, where it's a taboo that people aren't even conscious of it being a taboo, even after you've put it in front of them. And it takes the artist to kind of keep pushing it in front of the public in over and over and over again in ways. And, and I can definitely relate to your story. My ex-wife and I went through the same, well, not the same, but we went through our own profound infertility thing. And it was, a dark chapter in my, well, I guess my ex-wife was more aware in real time of how, I think it affected her negatively. I was able to like repress how it affected me in real time, but it still had as big of an impact over time on me as it did on her. We ended up adopting a child, and as well as having one that we were told that we couldn't.
Oh, beautiful.
And I just can remember all of, well, there you go through stages in life where, you're single and you're having fun and blah, blah, blah. And then everybody starts coupling and everyone starts having children. And then you're on the other side of that. And, some people decide not to, but then there'll be people like the way we were, where we didn't even realize that there was a problem exactly. It had to take a kind of an expert to say like, duh, what do you think is happening? And then once we got into that world, the treatments for infertility are very debilitating in ways, especially emotionally, because of the use of hormones and things. But I can also remember how, people would say things like, oh, you just need to, these like wives. Well, that's like a sexist term. Let me say, people would, you see that's how it comes up. It's like they're quote unquote wives' tales, meaning they're not important. Right. They're not true. That phrase just came to me as like a kind of an example of just an implicitly sexist thing. But their beliefs that people would say, and actually it was men. I remember, in fact, I think, I don't want to say who said these kinds of things, but things like, all you have to do is stop trying or relax and you'll have a baby, and like not even having no concept of what like egg retrieval is like, and all the stuff that you go through. And I don't. The thing is, it's how I don't know that that's well, how a visual artist would would do that kind of. I've seen a lot of visual art about medical stuff, and it's, I don't know. But to me, like there are so many stories to be told, that haven't been told in that world, and there's so many, there's so many ways to. Anyway.
This is the first time I've ever talked about it with you.
Yeah, well, I could see you were being affected, and I just wanted to tell you that I've been there, and I can remember. I mean, I feel like I'm on the other side of it, but I can remember how difficult it was, and I, part of it also was the memory of I guess there's a different chapter that I have, which is the whole world of adopting a human, which is another way to have children, and the taboos around that are phenomenal, including here's or implicit biases. Like here's one that I don't think most people realize is when people find out like one of my kids is adopted, they'll admire me. It'll be like, wow, that was such a good thing for you to do. It was so good of you to do that kind of thing. Or it was like as though it's like a virtue signaling thing. Like it was like so it was like some kind of altruistic act. And I don't know why that always offends me when people, they're not intending to be rude.
Well, it's curious.
It shows a profound lack of being able to put themselves in other people's shoes.
Exactly. And I think that there's a whole lot of narcissism involved in having a biological child.
Yeah.
Gotta look like me. I'm going to raise it in my own image.
Yeah.
There's some really weird kind of almost messianic thing going on that is a weird cultural.
Yeah. And that when it's not your own genes, there's some kind of sacrifice involved.
Right.
Or that you're being noble. It's
right.
like, what are you talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Like adopted child vomited on my jacket at weddings more often than my genetically related child.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just as biological, and they do just as many. They're just there's just as much. I mean, raise. Anyway, there's.
Well, it's interesting to think about, from the level of connectedness or interconnectedness between human beings, between humans and animals, between human beings, animals, and nature. How kind of split off and compartmentalized often I think people view themselves as opposed to the other, as opposed to animals, as opposed to nature or the environment or ecology. You know what? We are all just one and together, and we're united on the level of physics, energetically, on a molecular level. People are sharing and exchanging molecules and these energies constantly, right? Throwing off their molecules, it's hitting somebody else. Really just on the level of science and physics, we're all connected, all united in that way. But if we want to think about ecology, and if we want to think about planetary health and well-being, we're one people, and we're all united by this incredible home that we all share. We all share the same planet, our Mother Earth, our Earth Mother, And so it's interesting how, politics uses, sort of propaganda techniques to segregate and to separate and to point an accusatory finger there, blame them, they're different than us, go get them, but we're all the same. We're all the same. It does, we're all just, people or other biological organisms trying to survive, and it's interesting to think about the kind of narcissism involved quite often in the way people perceive themselves, maybe in opposition to other people or the rest of the world, or they're from France or whatever. Whatever it is, the kind of xenophobia and the biases and all of this stuff involved in kind of defining who I am in deference to the other, which is a really strange phenomenon. So when you embrace another human organism, a baby or something, for instance, or a child that you're adopting, and you have this empathy bond because that's another human organism, another person. I want to care for them. I mean, it seems like it's such a fundamental thing, really, that everyone would want to embrace. Let's all take care of each other. Let's help this poor, beautiful child who needs help, who needs a family. And yet it's a very different thing. Plenty of people adopt but I know it just brought me to kind of a broader idea in terms of identity and who we identify with, and.
Well, I know you have an idea for turning these concepts into an app, right? What's that about?
Yeah, so you and I have had the pleasure of talking about ecology and planetary wellness and the wellness of biological beings, creatures, human and animals. I am working on an app design, which is in the beta phase. My team is assembled, our content's ready to go. We just simply have to build aspects of this app, but it's called Humanimal. And it is an app that is meant to engender empathy bond between humans, animals, and the environment. And so really, I refer to it as an ecology app that will allow everyone to have, kind of eco-activism at their fingertips in an educational way, in an entertaining way. And it kind of, it fits under the auspices of health and wellness, education, and gaming. So it occupies this sweet spot in terms of apps. So
can you tell us how does it work? What's the game?
So, everybody somehow, I think many people anyway, they recognize there is this connection between animals. They have a cat or a dog or something. But, I think there is some weird Judeo-Christian idea that, God gave us dominion over the planet and the animals. And, it's kind of onerous, really, when you look at how there has been a strange kind of splitting off of how humans regard other biological creatures as being lesser or being, inconsequential. And so, both of my parents are hippies, and they're both vegan vegetarians. And while I will eat a really delicious grass-fed organic steak every now and then, they would really get upset with me and think that was barbaric. And in some ways it is barbaric because we, treat animals and the planet so poorly as a species. Human beings are creating a real mess of the planet. And so I wanted to, instead of shaming people, I wanted to create a beautiful way to engender a kind of a bond, right? An empathy bond. And so this app allows people to connect with animals, a spirit animal, and have a guided meditation with this animal, and to have insights about this animal, their habitat, how they can help to protect the habitat, how they can help to protect the animal, and also provide stories from around the world. You know, animals have played such a prominent role in literature and in the symbolism of cultures from the very beginning. You can think of, you know, the most early cave paintings, for instance, where, you know, you have bisons or you have lions, and animals have been revered and worshipped, right? And then suddenly, you know, it seems that there are, you know, 150 species of animals that go extinct every day. Every day. That seems absurd, and it seems like some statistic I just made up. And, you know, maybe it's slightly inaccurate. It's probably higher than 150 a day. But yes, you know, we need to sort of reconnect in a really healthy way with our animal, you know, our fellow creatures here that we share the planet with, and with the ecosystem. And the planet is a whole ecosystem, right? And we're part of that. We have to recognize that we're intimately and inextricably connected, and we're in this web, which is this matrix of life and well-being, and everything is connected. And, you know, climate change and global warming, and, you know, I think people feel powerless to do anything about ecology and habitat loss and extinction, and we're facing the 6th great mass extinction. So, well, this app is meant to hook people with a fun, engaging way of receiving personal insights and daily downloads of messages and connecting to animals and habitats. It's for all ages, but also a way to contribute financially just by purchasing the app, right, to organizations that help to protect habitats and help to also protect animals. So, and ourselves, right? So, yeah.
So the app like assigns a spirit animal to you and then provides some visual morphing of your face with the animals, and then provides like content related to that spirit animal, and then provides, like, empowers the person to make a contribution to some entity that supports the animal or its habitat.
Yes, in some, it's kind of on a basic level, yes. I mean, that all of those things are components of it. The contribution is built into the app purchase. So the contribution is just there. So,
but the reason someone would engage with this is that there's a kind of personalization of the animal, and
yes,
you become some kind of an augmented reality where you become one with the animal or something.
Yes, well, there is that. Yes, so there's that playful gaming quality using technology, right, in the service of ecology. On that level of, you know, creating a fun and playful sort of the gaming aspect of it. And then people can share their images on social media with friends and so forth, and have a beautiful portrait of themselves as a gorgeous lion or something, you know.
So there's some artificial intelligence way of morphing your face into an animal's head or something.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there are programs that can facilitate this.
I mean, it sounds like another patent you're developing or something.
Well, I can, you know, there are now, it's funny because when I first came up with this idea, the technology was not quite there yet, but now it is. So I can start to implement some of these technologies, and I don't need to, I won't patent this. You know, patenting is a strange thing, and someone can rip you off if they want to rip you off anyway by, you know, sort of reverse engineering it and sort of figuring out a workaround.
The only reason to get a patent, well, there's two reasons. One is for vanity, I guess, and the other would be if you can make money off the patent.
Right. Yeah, well, it's true, but someone will still rip you off, and unless you dominate the
Well,
market it with your product, then somebody else, Joe Blow, who can do it
the only way
cheaper.
you can make money off of patent is if you can enforce it. So it's very difficult for
Right.
individual inventors to.
That's right. And I learned that. I was very lucky to work with an incredible IP company that gave me a pro bono patent for my multiaxial 10-in-1 magnetic joints. And it probably was, upwards of $250,000 worth of legal work, because we had to overcome all of these medical patents. And I went through volunteer lawyers for the arts for that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so the arts again, and I do need to leverage this patent, and to pay maintenance fees and all,
But I agree with you. The patent isn't the issue here. It's more about how you get it out, how to make this viral. And I mean, there are platforms for which I've played with recently for creating we know it with Snapchat and primarily Snapchat, I think, is famous for putting these big eyes on people and tongues and doggy ears and stuff. And you're talking about doing something like that that's maybe a little more that's a lot more sophisticated, but also has an educational, has a kind of deep education associated with it. But again, we're back to the kind of the beginning of this conversation, I think, where what sells is the candy kind of, and the trick, I think, for doing what you want to do is to make this into an eye candy thing that probably is built on an existing platform, but then has what's the word I want? It's like a funnel, like a tease. It's like trick. There's a word for it in marketing, but you're basically converting someone through this eye candy of becoming a bird or something, and then you're kind of sucked into did you know you could help this bird, or you just did help this bird.
Being empowering people through an app that is also about wellness, planetary wellness. It's a biological conservation app.
Well, so I mean, that's the trick, is how do you get someone? I mean, to me, this is the problem you're working with, is how do you get people who want to be entertained? How do you convert them into wanting to heal the planet or heal themselves? And it's amazing to see. You just see it. I mean, I could just see. I'm walking the dog this morning, and everybody's at the bus stop, and there's one guy has his earphones in, and he's talking. And everyone's waiting there, and I'm just imagining how annoyed the other people are listening to this guy having a conversation, and they're all looking at their phones, and I'm sure they're all just going through their Instagram streams. I mean, there's no one doing work there. They're all just trying to ignore the guy talking, and I don't know. I don't know how that. I mean, we've seen how that enters the political realm in these hugely dysfunctional ways.
Yeah.
I don't know that we've seen how to do it in a functional way. And it seems to me like the kind of app you're talking about is trying to trying to use the visual arts to kind of trick people into ecological awareness.
Yes.
Which seems to me like the opposite of what most social media impact is at this point. It's tricking people into just mindless craziness.
Exactly. So using similar mechanisms to sort of pull someone in. It's fun. There's that gaming quality to it. It appeals to a kind of narcissistic culture that wants to see themselves, on social media, transformed into some beautiful beast. And but at the same time, it occupies this really beautiful sweet spot with education and wellness. So people also want to be well, and the wellness industry is a $2 billion industry. So it's going to hook into kind of a wellness and kind of self-care industry that is burgeoning. People recognize that things are way out of balance and that they too are out of balance. We're coming out of the pandemic now, gradually coming out. I went to a restaurant the first time and sat inside without a mask for the first time in, almost 2 years, right? Or however long it was, like 19 months, or it's last, May. And, I'm distinctly aware of the need to really change the way people interact with their environment and other biological organisms, animals, and there needs to be, an awareness that we're not empowered. We can actually, it's like crowdsourcing for ecology, right? We can all participate in saving the planet every day. The simple little things that we do can have a profound effect if everyone's doing them. So if everybody who has a smartphone and has this app can contribute not just to their own well-being through, guided meditation with your spirit animal, for instance, breathing, listening to the sounds of the rainforest or the ocean, or for me, as a little hippie kid, listening to the sounds of the humpback whale was like a profound thing for me, on vinyl. And imagining a whole other realm of existence for this other creature that was so noble and beautiful, So how do you open up a space for imagining and for transformation, not just within an individual, but really a transformation globally? I think it's the technology that we all have it in our hands or at arm's length at all times. We have it at all times. So then how do you empower people with this technology to save the planet, the animals, and themselves? We can save ourselves, but we all have to work at it. And, people, this ecology is not people's issue necessarily, but it is, right, by default, because we're all affected by it profoundly. So, if you just pull them in and present something that's fun and gaming and about their own wellness, then suddenly they could be immersed in a kind of deep ecology, actually, a kind of deep ecology. So anyway, that's...
People get empowered by, your battery journal, your Humanimal project, and your art. What can they do to find out more about all this?
Well, batteryjournal.org is the platform for art, culture, politics, and wellness. And it's a new entity, and it's growing and becoming. And as I said, it's becoming a nonprofit. And
you're taking subscribers? Are you taking contributors?
People at the moment can just access all of the content for free. It's free on batteryjournal.org.
Do you have an issue coming out, or is it just an ongoing?
Well, I just published a really beautiful piece of writing by Donald Cuspit, who is one of my mentors, very famous art historian and psychoanalyst. And it's on a really interesting artist named Michael Zansky. And I made a feature-length documentary for Michael about his work. And so if you go to batteryjournal.org, under featured writing, you can access Donald Cuspit's essay. You can access the documentary that I produced and directed and I'm also the interviewer. You can hear my voice in it, asking some really deep and probing, powerful questions. And then, you can see the work of this incredible pioneering artist, Michael Zansky. So, and, go to videos, you can see all of the videos. And I also have an ongoing salon series, which is Battery Journal Salon. And you can have access to those recordings in the videos. And
for
yeah.
and for your art and the app, what do people need to do?
So Humanimal is emerging, and there will be a website for it, and I think it will be free to download. I have to put in a word about my business partner, Kristen Beveridge, who is a wonder kid out of Harvard, like yourself, and she's yeah.
I'm not out of Harvard.
Oh, you're not? I thought you did your PhD at Harvard.
No, NYU.
Oh, NYU.
I've lectured at Harvard.
All right.
And my PhD, my doctoral advisor became the head of the Kennedy School at Harvard, but I knew him when he was the dean at NYU.
So where did you did your undergraduate work at NYU too?
No.
Oh, Vassar. Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Somebody told me, who told me that you went to Harvard? Michael Reese.
Oh, no.
It's nice to bring up Michael Reese because he connected the two of us.
He
and
did.
I feel like, and I feel a real empathy bond with you, Ben, because you're doing such great work.
Thank you.
In terms of wellness and education. So
thank you. And you're doing awesome work. This is fascinating. Can people see your artwork somewhere?
Yeah. AnnaEhrsam.com is my website, which needs to be updated. But yeah, AnnaEhrsam.com. And you can see some of my experiments with optics, with light, and photonics, which is something I've been interested in. Physics is a hobby of mine. I'm really interested in kind of getting down to the smallest constituent of matter, which is light. And we are light. We're made of light. Our consciousness is structured with light. And so it's interesting to think about, that kind of energy, that light wave particle and energy, which is actually connecting all of us all the time. So I've been studying the phenomena of light and optics, and I am the first artist to figure out how to trap light, which is an interesting thing. So I trapped it and played with it. And this was an interesting trajectory that came from necessity, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? But I was a new mother with a premature child who was, needed to be bottle fed around the clock and slept in these short increments. And I had to figure out how to keep making my work. And so in the middle of the night, I got up and I went to my studio, my desk, and it was dark. It was totally dark. And I started seeing these little bursts of light, these little kind of particles. And I kind of started to get into, well, what is this that I'm seeing? And it turned out that if you let your eyes adjust to the darkness for about a half an hour, you don't have color vision, but you have the ability to see light and black and white, but your eyes become 1,000 times more sensitive to light. And then beyond that, it turned out that I was seeing individual light particles or photons, and the human eye can see individual photonic emissions, little particles. And then several months later, there was a study that came out in a physics journal that had proven this. But I had seen this, right? So then I embarked on this whole practice of understanding the properties of light. And while I do not have, $1 million apparatus for studying the process, I made my own light trap. And as it turned out, it works beautifully. And teams of physicists later down the road came out with a light trap that is exactly the same. It's the same, except much higher tech. But this is another instance where, art and technology, art and science, there are these wonderful ways that they interact, inform each other. And I think artists often are the avant-garde. They're ahead of the curve in many ways.
And we can see more about what you're talking about at on Ehrsam.com.
Yes, and at Ehrsam.com you can see many of my light experiments. Yep, my optic and light experiments, and they're beautiful. And people will look at them and think, oh, these are beautiful colors. But there's a whole pretty rigorous theoretical apparatus behind them based on my exploration into the phenomena of light and physics. So.
Well, that's amazing, and it reminds me of some of the ancient wisdom about wide-angle vision that enables us to walk in the woods, ways of relaxing and expanding your eyes so that you can, and there are ways to train people to be able to basically have night vision.
Yes.
And we've lost that through the tunnel vision of looking at screens.
That's right.
And it's caused an explosion of myopia throughout the world. And anyway.
All sorts of problems with that. But that brings me to another point that, I'm really interested in the work that you do in the wild, in nature breakthroughs. And we had talked about, and I'd love to invite you back to Battery Journal to have a discussion and really sort of dig in on health and wellness issues and fasting, and the idea of also planetary wellness and, the general wellness and well-being of the organism. And,
that can be our next conversation. And we've already recorded one conversation for the Battery Journal, which is also hopefully will be available at some point. And I'm just can't thank you enough for coming on the Nature Breakthroughs podcast. And this has been fascinating and wonderful. Thank you, Anna Ehrsam.
Oh, thank you so much, Ben Goldman. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to continuing our dialogue.
Thanks for listening to the Nature Breakthroughs podcast with Dr. Wild Ben Goldman. To discover what you need for personal, organizational, and societal change, get your free download of 3 ancient rituals smart entrepreneurs use to bounce back from shifts in the market and inside themselves. Go to www.naturebreakthroughs.com.